A passport scans under fluorescent lights in Ben Gurion Airport while an ancient name glows from a 3,000-year-old text. Israel stamped in blue ink today. Israel carved in stone and sung in psalms then. Same word on paper, different weight in the soul. One is a modern state with ministries, missile defense, and high-speed rail. The other is a person renamed after a midnight struggle, a people birthed at a mountain of fire, and a land stitched by covenant and prophecy. Many maps try to flatten that story. The Bible refuses to flatten anything. It turns names into destinies and places into promises that outlive empires. The biblical thread begins with a man who does not let go. Jacob wrestles until the dawn and receives a new name, Israel, meaning one who strives with God. That moment in Genesis 32 turns a private struggle into a public story. His 12 sons become the 12 tribes. The family descends into Egypt during famine. Centuries later, a nation walks back out under a sky torn by plagues and a sea that moves like a door on hinges. Sinai is not a constitution convention in the modern sense, yet it patterns a people. Exodus 19 and 20 present a covenant of law, justice, feasts, and a way of life. The book of Deuteronomy speaks of blessing and exile, rain and drought, and the gravity of forgetting. The land promised earlier to Abraham in Genesis 15 with edges that stretch from a border river in Egypt to the Euphrates becomes a canvas for those promises and warnings. The phrase biblical Israel means more than one thing. It can mean the person Jacob, the 12 tribes, the united monarchy under David and Solomon, the northern kingdom after the split, or the exiles who sang next to unfamiliar rivers. Context shifts the meaning each time. Under Joshua, tribes receive lots of territory. Judges preside over a patchwork of clans, fortified towns, and shrines. The unity under David around 1000 BCE forms a high point. Jerusalem becomes a capital. The royal house takes shape. Archaeology adds rough edges to the picture. The Tel Dan Stele, discovered in 1993, references the House of David, the earliest extra-biblical mention of David's dynasty. The Mesha Stele, from Moab, around 840 BCE, boasts of victories against Israel and mentions Omri. The Bible speaks of David's reach and Solomon's wealth. Vassal states and tribute are part of the story, not neat border lines drawn with a ruler on a modern map. The kingdom splits after Solomon. The north keeps the name Israel. The south takes the name Judah. 2 capitals, 2 cultic centers, and 2 sets of prophets speak judgment and hope. Kings in the north build rival sanctuaries at Dan and Bethel. The prophet Amos roars about justice rolling down like waters. Hosea imagines an unfaithful marriage as a nation's broken covenant. In the south, Isaiah watches empires grind forward and promises a child called Emmanuel. Micah speaks of swords beaten into plowshares and a future ruler from Bethlehem. The identity Israel stretches again. It becomes less a border and more a calling that survives borders. The prophets announce that exile will not end the story. They prepare listeners for a return that God alone can orchestrate. Empires test these promises. In 722 BCE, Assyria crushes the northern kingdom and deports many. Exile becomes a human geography, not merely a theological consequence. Some northerners seek refuge in Judah. The southern kingdom holds until 586 BCE, when Babylon tears down the first temple. Jeremiah writes a letter to the exiles, telling them to build houses and seek the welfare of the city where they live. Psalm 137 records grief by the rivers of Babylon. Then a pivot occurs with a royal decree. In 539 BCE, Cyrus of Persia takes Babylon. The Cyrus cylinder, a small clay artifact, records a policy of allowing subject peoples to return and rebuild cultic sites. The Bible's Ezra 1 echoes this reality. The return begins. The rebuilt Second Temple stands by 516 BCE. Ezra and Nehemiah add Torah-centered reforms and walls around Jerusalem. From that point forward, Judea becomes a name used in Persian and Hellenistic records, even as the people still carry the biblical name Israel in liturgy, genealogies, and hope. The Hasmoneans fight a guerrilla war against Seleucid decrees around 167 BCE. The Maccabean revolt yields a brief period of Jewish sovereignty. Coins from this era bear Hebrew inscriptions and symbols like cornucopias and pomegranates. Herod the Great, a Roman client king, renovates the temple into a wonder, doubling the platform and raising gleaming stones. Rome tightens control. In 70 CE, Titus destroys the temple. In 173 to 135 CE, the Bar Kokhba revolt ends in disaster. The Emperor Hadrian rebuilds Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina and bans Jews from entering there for a time. The province is renamed Syria Palestina, a political name layered over an older promise. Diaspora is not entirely new, but it becomes the main setting. Yet the name Israel does not evaporate. It migrates into prayer, into Sabbath table songs, into the way synagogues point their arcs toward Jerusalem. Rabbinic Judaism takes shape in this crucible. At Yavne, sages stabilize a people without a temple, building a portable homeland in texts and practices. The Mishnah crystallizes around 200 CE. The Talmud grows over centuries in Babylonia and the land of Israel, weaving law, lore, and memory. The prayers keep repeating a refrain: "Gather us from the four corners of the earth. Let our eyes behold your return to Zion." Even when medieval Jewish life flourishes in places like Babylon, Spain, North Africa, and later Eastern Europe, the compass needle points toward Jerusalem. Pilgrim letters describe visits to holy sites. The Cairo Geniza preserves vivid fragments, receipts, and poems and rabbinic queries, a paper archaeology of the scattered nation. Islamic rule arrives in 638 CE. The Umayyads build the Dome of the Rock in 691 and the Al-Aqsa Mosque shortly after. Jewish and Christian communities continue under new rulers with restrictions and periods of tolerance. Crusaders arrive in 1999 with fire and sword. Ayyubids and Mamluks follow. Jews cling to cities such as Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, and Tiberias, sometimes in tiny numbers, sometimes in small bursts of growth. From 1517 to 1917, the Ottoman Empire governs. Safed becomes a center of mysticism in the 1500s. Joseph Caro writes the Shulchan Aruch there. Isaac Luria reforms Kabbalistic language with images of sparks and vessels. Earthly poverty pairs with transcendent visions. In the 1700s and early 1800s, groups of Jews inspired by the Vilna Gaon and by Hasidic leaders moved to the land of Israel. They settle in the four holy cities, raise funds from diaspora communities, and study. Ottoman land laws change ownership patterns and invite external investors. The modern era knocks at the door with steamships and telegraphs. New agricultural colonies appear after 1882 with the first Aliyah. Petah Tikva, Rishon LeZion, and Zitron Yaakov rise out of malarial swamps and fallow plains. Baron Edmund de Rothschild finances vineyards and wineries. Teachers create new Hebrew words for milk, bicycle, and newspaper. Eliezer ben Yehuda pushes families to speak only Hebrew at home. A language once mostly reserved for prayer becomes a tool for buying oranges in a market and arguing about politics in a cafe. In 1897, Theodor Herzl convenes the first Zionist Congress in Basel. His diary notes that he founded the Jewish state in Basel, if not legally, then in principle. The movement is a collision of messianic yearning, European nationalism, socialist idealism, and raw survival instinct. Russian pogroms, Dreyfus in France, and tightening immigration quotas in the West slammed doors in faces. World War I ends the Ottoman chapter. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 expresses British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, while committing not to prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. San Remo, in 1920, incorporates the Balfour language into international decisions. The League of Nations mandate for Palestine in 1922 makes Britain the power on the ground. Arab communities resist, fearing dispossession and demographic change. Clashes erupt in 1920, 1921, and 1929. The 1929 riots include a massacre of Jewish residents in Hebron. The British Peel Commission in 1937 suggests partition. The 1939 White Paper restricts Jewish immigration as Europe accelerates toward catastrophe. Underground networks like the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi argue over strategy. Refugee ships are turned back. Europe's Jews are devoured by a machine of murder. 6 million dead against a silence that still stuns the throat. The Second World War ends, and the British Mandate creaks with contradictions. On 29 November 1947, the UN General Assembly adopts Resolution 181, recommending partition into Jewish and Arab states with economic union and special international administration for Jerusalem. Celebrations and funerals follow on the same streets. Civil war breaks out between communities. On 14 May 1948, David Ben-Gurion stands in Tel Aviv and reads Israel's Declaration of Independence. It invokes the ancient name and covenantal history, while promising equality of social and political rights to all inhabitants. In the hours after the speech, armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq move the War of Independence, or the Nakba, depending on whose family album you open, redraws the human map. By 1949 armistice lines, Israel controls more territory than the UN plan had allotted. Around 700,000 Palestinian Arabs flee or are expelled from their homes in 1947-49. Hundreds of rural villages fall empty. In the following decades, about 850,000 Jews from Arab and Muslim majority countries leave or are expelled, the majority resettling in Israel. Two traumas, intertwined and unresolved, live in sirens and songs. The modern state consolidates. The law of return in 1950 grants every Jew the right to immigrate. The Knesset crafts basic laws that function like a piecemeal constitution. Hebrew becomes the official language, with Arabic carrying special status and widespread use. The judiciary, the rabbinate, and the military settle into tense cooperation. Jerusalem is divided by a dangerous seam. From 1949 to 1967. In 1956, Israel joins Britain and France in a Sinai campaign. In June 17, the Six-Day War reshapes everything. Israel captures East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan Heights. The Western Wall returns to Jewish hands for the first time since 1948. New dilemmas arrive that still defy easy sentences. The Yom Kippur War in October 1973 shatters the illusion of invincibility. Egypt and Israel sign a peace treaty in 1979, and Israel returns Sinai by 1982. Jordan and Israel sign peace in 1994. The Oslo Accords in the 1990s create the Palestinian Authority and a complex administrative map. The Golan Heights Law of 1981 applies Israeli law to the Golan. Israel disengages from Gaza in 2005, removing settlements and soldiers. Periods of negotiation alternate with terror attacks, rocket fire, and military operations. The headlines run hot, but underneath them a quieter revolution continues. Hebrew flows on the street like it always wanted to. Teenagers in Tel Aviv argue in biblical roots with modern slang. The old letters etch new apps and menu boards. Coins carry ancient motifs. A lyre, a pomegranate, the seven-branched menorah. That menorah is the state emblem, lifted from a relief on the Arch of Titus in Rome, where Romans carved their victory parade with the captured temple vessels. The symbol returns home with a defiant twist. The calendar aligns a work week with biblical rhythms. Passover is a national vacation. Shavuot is dairy cheesecake and all-night learning. Yom Kippur brings bicycles to empty highways. Agricultural laws, once tied to a temple economy, become everyday policy debates. The sabbatical year, Shemitah, affects farmers across the country. Rabbis and agronomists hash out Heder Makira and Otzar Beit Din, legal mechanisms to navigate modern markets and biblical rules. The temple does not stand, but echoes of priestly systems hum in supermarket aisles and export schedules. Archaeology turns soil into footnotes for verses. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovered at Qumran in 1947-56 provide Hebrew Bible manuscripts 1,000 years older than previously known copies. The Great Isaiah Scroll offers a nearly complete text from the Second Temple era. The Bar Kokhba letters found in the Judean desert include real estate transactions and military orders signed by Shimon ben Kosiba. The City of David excavations south of the current Old City peel back layers of Iron Age Jerusalem. In the north, a basalt inscription at Tel Dan mentions the House of David. The Merneptah stele from Egypt, around 1208 BCE, lists Israel among defeated peoples in Canaan, the earliest mention of Israel outside the Bible. Potsherds with seals, ostraca with names like Hanan and Shebna, and administrative boule with Paleo-Hebrew script keep surfacing. Stones do not settle every argument, but they crowd the table with evidence that stubbornly refuses to evaporate. Modern Israel becomes a sovereign experiment. Parliamentary democracy churns with parties that fracture and fuse. Ultra-Orthodox, secular, traditional, Reform, and Masorti communities negotiate daily life together. Christians, Muslims, Druze, Bedouin, Circassians, and Baha'is live inside the citizenry with varied rights and distinct histories. The population approaches 10 million by the mid-2020s, with around 7 million Jews and over 2 million Arab citizens, alongside other minorities. The Israeli Defense Forces name units after biblical warriors and cities. Operations carry names that echo ancient metaphors and prophetic images. High-tech corridors sprout where vineyards once stood, and then the vineyards return as boutique wineries gather awards. Hebrew songs remix verses from Ecclesiastes and Isaiah. The national anthem, Hatikva, ends with the phrase, "The hope, 2,000 years old." The hope is not a neat pledge. It is a lifeline thrown across catastrophes and comebacks. A crucial differentiation tightens the lens. Biblical Israel is a composite reality. It is the person renamed Israel, the tribes, the covenant, the kingdom, and the prophetic remnant. It is a people defined by God's election and law, not by a modern passport. It is the territory named in divine speech, a land that serves as a theater for covenant faithfulness and covenant breach. Modern Israel is a political state founded in 1948, recognized by the family of nations, and governed by elected officials and civil law under basic laws. Areas of overlap are real. The core land largely matches the hills and plains, where patriarchs walked and prophets thundered. The majority language recovers the speech of the Bible. The holidays and the weekly Sabbath still mark time. The majority culture sees itself as the heir to biblical Israel, whether it believes because of faith, family, or history. Areas of difference are just as real. Ancient Israel never drove a parliament and a supreme court. Modern Israel does not operate as a monarchy or a theocracy, even as rabbinic courts regulate marriage and divorce for Jews, and other religious courts serve other communities under Israeli law. The tribal map of Joshua allocates inheritance to Reuben, Judah, Ephraim, and the rest. Modern Israel zones municipalities and designates nature reserves. The ancient temple sacrificial system does not function. Memory fills its place with prayer and a retaining wall. Ancient Israel's borders breathed with the tides of military success and imperial subjugation. Modern Israel's boundaries started with 1949 armistice lines, shifted in 1967, and were adjusted in peace treaties and unilateral moves. Territory such as the West Bank, called Judea and Samaria in many Jewish and Israeli contexts, remains disputed. Multiple populations and multiple legal frameworks layer inside that space. The word Israel crosses from spiritual identity to statecraft and back again with each news cycle, but the meanings do not collapse into each other. Theologies multiply, while history refuses to sit quietly. In Jewish thought, the people Israel are the covenant community descended from those tribes, and converts who joined over time, a family bound by Torah and common fate. Some streams of Jewish thought, often associated with religious Zionism, see the modern state as the Achelta de Geulah, the beginning of redemption. Chief Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, in the early 20th century, framed secular pioneers as unwitting instruments in a divine drama. Other Jewish groups, including the ultra-Orthodox Satmar dynasty, read the return to sovereignty before messianic redemption as a human overreach. Within secular Zionism, visionaries like Herzl and Ben-Gurion aimed for a normal nation, not a messianic one. Yet the Bible provided symbols and a storyline that no one could fully ignore. Debates over the Sabbath in the public sphere, military service, and settlements reflect divergent answers to a single identity dilemma. In Christian theology, interpretations range. Supersessionism, once common, taught that the church replaces Israel and that the land promises are spiritualized. In the last century, many churches reassessed that position, emphasizing Paul's statement in Romans 11 that the gifts and calling of God to Israel are irrevocable. Dispensationalist streams read 1948 and 1967 as clear markers of prophetic fulfillment, aligning modern events with Ezekiel 36:37 and other texts. Other Christian traditions affirm God's ongoing election of the Jewish people, while maintaining that the land is not the center of the new covenant. The spectrum is wide, and the stakes feel high, because texts and headlines collide. The New Testament uses Israel to describe the Jewish people, and occasionally a renewed community in Christ, leading to centuries of debate on terminology. Meanwhile, Christians living in the land today, including Palestinian Christians, carry stories that complicate any easy theological equation. Islamic sources honor Bani Israel as the people of the prophets and speak of a land connected to them, while generating a different sacred geography anchored in Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. Over time, Islamic jurisprudence and political events shaped attitudes toward Jewish sovereignty in the land. Contemporary Muslim and Arab narratives emphasize indigenous presence, dispossession, and the sanctity of Al-Quds. Each tradition reads the same hills through a different lens. Modern international law speaks a separate language of self-determination, partition plans, armistice agreements, and human rights documents. The modern state draws legitimacy from peoplehood claims, diplomatic recognition, and ability to govern, not from direct biblical proof texts. Yet the old texts keep stepping into the room, because names carry memory, and memory carries power. Landlines turn into storylines. Biblical Israel's tribal map includes cities like Hebron, Bethel, Shiloh, and Shechem. Modern Israel's demarcations traveled from the 1949 Green Line, to the 1967 realities and into present-day negotiations and unilateral steps. East Jerusalem was annexed by Israel in 1967 and later reinforced by the 1980 Basic Law. Jerusalem, capital of Israel, a move not recognized by most countries for decades, although some later moved embassies to the city. The Golan Heights saw Israeli law extended in 1981. The Sinai was returned to Egypt after the 1979 peace treaty and the 1982 withdrawal. Gaza saw Israeli withdrawal of settlements and military in 2005, and subsequent control by Hamas led to new cycles of conflict and blockade. A vocabulary war accompanies the map war. Settlement or neighborhood, barrier or wall, Judea and Samaria, or West Bank. Each phrase selects a storyline and a legal argument. Ingathering shifts from psalm to airline manifest. Operation Magic Carpi in 1,949,950 airlifted around 49,000 Jews from Yemen. Operation Ezra and Nehemiah in 1995-20 brought over 120,000 Jews from Iraq. Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1091 lifted Ethiopian Jews to Israel under dramatic circumstances. Soviet Jewish immigration around 1990 to 1991 added over 900,000 new citizens, reshaping culture, science, and politics. The Beta Israel community carried ancient prayers about Zion in Gez into modern Hebrew classes. The Bnei Amenashi from northeast India claimed ancient ancestry and began arriving in small numbers. Israel's demography remixed Jewish lineages from Morocco, Poland, Iran, Ukraine, Argentina, and beyond, while also maintaining significant Arab, Druze, Bedouin, and Christian communities with citizenship. The global Jewish population hovers around 15 million. Israel holds the largest single Jewish community, with over 7 million, approaching half of world Jewry. A people once fluent in exile begins to relearn majority life, and diaspora communities renegotiate what homeland means when home now looks like a direct flight instead of a verse. Memory sometimes drifts into genetics and archaeology. Population genetics research identifies shared Middle Eastern ancestry among diverse Jewish communities, while also showing centuries of admixture in lands of dispersion. The details remain under debate in academic journals, yet a broad pattern emerges of connection to the Levant alongside the imprint of exile lands. In the ground, the Dead Sea Scrolls Paleo-Hebrew letters resemble the letters on the modern shekel. In daily life, a Jewish Ethiopian Israeli soldier in an IDF uniform recites the same Shema that a Babylonian Jew whispered in 550 CE. A secular designer in Haifa quotes Ecclesiastes on a t-shirt. An Arab citizen in Haifa drives past a synagogue on the way to a mosque and picks up his son from a school where the staff speaks both Hebrew and Arabic. The story refuses to be simple. The word same tries to shrink what refuses to fit. Biblical Israel and modern Israel hold a strong line of continuity in peoplehood, language, rituals, and core geography. The laughter of children in Beersheba connects to Abraham's well folded into modern plumbing. The blast of a shofar on Rosh Hashanah merges with police sirens, tested for civil defense. A yeshiva student studies Deuteronomy's land laws and then goes to vote in a polling station in the gym of a secular high school. Continuity saturates cuisine, wedding blessings, parental names, and the direction of prayer. Continuity sits in the way old blessings appear on new plaques, like the Shehechianu set at ribbon cuttings for skyscrapers. Difference is just as stubborn. Biblical Israel's center was the temple, priesthood, and sacrificial system. Modern Israel's center is a parliament on a hill and a set of ministries and courts that administer a diverse society. The biblical kingdom was bound to covenantal law. The modern state is a civil democracy with Jewish public symbols and constitutional principles contested in the courts and the streets. Ancient Israel's identity was tribal and genealogical, though it had room for grafting in figures like Ruth the Moabitess and Rahab of Jericho. Modern Israel chooses citizenship by law, grants immediate immigration rights to those recognized as Jews within its legal definitions, and also contains non-Jewish citizens who vote, pay taxes, and serve in professions in national service. Biblical Israel was subject to prophetic rebuke, aimed at kings and priests. Modern Israel lives in a world where journalists, NGOs, and courts play some of the roles that prophets once occupied, with far less metaphysical authority and far more data. Prophetic texts complicate any simplistic conclusion. Ezekiel 36:37 paints a scene of physical return and spiritual renewal in 2 stages: bones gathered and then breath given. Isaiah 2 imagines nations streaming to Zion to learn justice. Jeremiah 31 speaks of a new covenant written on hearts. Ezekiel 47 lays out a river flowing from the temple with healing in its wake. Jewish readers often see in these texts a long arc that does not end with any one war or one legislative session. Christian readers interpret these passages through Christ and the Church, with varied conclusions about the land. Others read them as literature that shaped a people with astonishing power. The modern state, embedded in this field of texts, acts, and legislates, while the words hover like a weather system. Archaeology keeps cutting into this conversation. A bulle from the city of David bears the name Jemariyahu ben Shaphan, which resonates with names in Jeremiah. LMLK seals stamped into 8th century BCE jar handles appear across Judah's hill country. Ostraka from Samaria, record shipments of oil and wine, with names that match biblical onomastics. The Israelite 4-room house. Typology anchors domestic life in the Iron Age. At the same time, modern narrative battles rage over the interpretation of these finds. Minimalists emphasize sparse evidence for a grand united monarchy. Maximalists assemble inscriptions and settlement patterns into a sturdy case. The conversation refuses finality because ancient life did not keep minutes, and modern readers bring assumptions to the dig. The conclusion refuses the easy binary. Modern Israel is not identical to biblical Israel in government form, borders, or the centrality of the temple cult. Modern Israel is also not an unrelated stranger wearing an old name for convenience. It is the political heir of a people whose identity formed around a covenant and a land, the primary vessel in which that people lives as a majority for the first time in 2 millennia. It preserves and renews Hebrew, anchors holidays to the same moon, and builds cities on ancient foundations and near ancient wells. It faces moral tests the prophets warned about in tight lines that still sting. It carries the weight of unresolved traumas with neighbors who also carry their own unhealed losses. It learns and unlearns daily what it means to be a Jewish state and a state of all its citizens, an argument that never ends, because democracy never ends while this people breathes. Heat draws out details in the crucible. The law of return, passed in 1950 and amended in 1970, defines who is eligible for automatic citizenship. Rabbinic courts apply halakha to marriage and divorce for Jewish citizens, while Sharia courts and other religious courts handle personal status for Muslims, Druze, and Christians. Civil marriage within the country does not exist, creating bureaucratic friction and cross-border wedding trips. Basic laws define human dignity and liberty, outline the separation of powers, and wrestle with Israel's Jewish and democratic character. The 2018 Basic Law, Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people, asserts national self-determination for Jews and elevates Hebrew as the language of the state, with Arabic given a special status. Critics and supporters argue in courts and editorials. Soldiers, students, and shopkeepers argue in line at the bakery. Modern Israel is a place where arguments are a civic sport, and sacred texts are never far from a microphone. Food remembers what footnotes forget. A Yemenite soup in Tel Aviv carries cinnamon memories from Sana'a and the salt of the Mediterranean. A Moroccan fish stew in Ashdod tastes like Friday night candles and the port of Casablanca. A bagel in Jerusalem hears Yiddish jokes and Arabic lullabies. Olive trees remember whose hands pruned them 2 generations ago, and whose hands do now. Farmers check for sabbatical year status and rainfall predictions, and rabbis pick up the phone to talk to agronomists. The religious kibbutzim hold dancing Torahs next to tractors with GPS. The secular kibbutzim host Seder nights, with poems and pantomime, reading the Haggadah that quotes the prophets and modern Hebrew pioneers. Life threads biblical Israel into modern kitchens and classrooms. Script changes language in the soul. The biblical term Israel performs as vocation and kinship. It obligates and binds, transcending geography. The state name Israel performs as sovereignty and citizenship. It includes and excludes by legal definition. The two share a family resemblance. They also often talk past each other. A believer in Safed might hear the word Israel and taste covenant. A software engineer in Herzliya might hear the same name and think taxes, Army Reserve duty, and voting day. A Samaritan priest in Holon hears a much older meaning, rooted in Mount Gerizim and ancient rites. A Palestinian resident of East Jerusalem hears the name and feels asphalt, checkpoints, and papers. The meanings do not resolve themselves. They collide, overlap, and absorb each other's paint like wet brush strokes. 8. Faithful history never shies away from discomfort. The Bible records Israel's sins with a clarity that no national epic would dare. Golden calves, idolatry on high places, kings who take what they want, and prophets who fear for their lives. Exile described as consequence, not merely enemy power. Modern Israel endures a probing moral gaze that may feel relentless. At home and abroad, prophets once looked kings in the eye and spoke disaster as easily as comfort. Journalists, scholars, and activists do not possess the gift of prophecy, yet the tradition of speaking hard truths seeped into this culture over centuries. Holding this line is costly. Abandoning it would be even costlier for a people whose core book never spared its heroes. Modern Israel manages a portfolio of paradoxes. It builds cutting-edge desalination plants while reciting ancient blessings over bread. It grows microchips and citrons. It deploys Iron Dome to intercept rockets while cherishing the medieval poetry of Ibn Gabirol and Yehuda Halevi. It mourns on Holocaust Remembrance Day with sirens that stop traffic, then dances a week later on Independence Day with fireworks over a city that never made Greek urban planners proud. It bears the scars of wars in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, 1980, 2006, and countless operations in between. And it stitches a culture that only half jokes about making a party out of everything. It holds world-class medical centers where Arab doctors treat Jewish patients and vice versa. It pursues peace agreements that shift from handshakes on a White House lawn to cold borders monitored by quiet coordination. The conversation returns to the original provocation like a wave. Modern Israel and biblical Israel share the same name because they share a core story. They are not interchangeable entities, and they do not cancel each other out. Modern Israel lives under the same sky as Abraham's stars and the same hills as David's tambourine, and the same silence that followed Jeremiah's laments. Modern Israel also writes new chapters with new instruments. Parliamentary votes, Supreme Court rulings, startup valuations, and immigration absorption centers. The Bible taught Israel that identity often survives catastrophe. The modern state teaches the world how identity behaves when given power again. One reveals character in exile. The other reveals character and sovereignty. It is possible to allow both truths to stand. Without forcing a merger they resist. Biblical Israel remains the root system. Modern Israel is the trunk and branches with fresh leaves, some growing in unexpected directions. The roots are not a museum piece, because the sap keeps rising. The branches are not a betrayal, because they hold birds that sing. The old melodies, with new harmonies. Political arguments and theological frameworks will not stop. They should not stop in a society that believes words can change lives and law can shape souls. Archaeologists will keep digging. Poets will keep reusing lines from the prophets. Leaders will keep invoking the ancestors and then missing their clear-eyed humility. Pilgrims will keep arriving with tears and cameras. Citizens will keep lining up at bakeries on Friday mornings to buy challah and rugelach, while air raid sirens are tested at noon. The name Israel refuses to flatten, chooses to echo, and insists on continuity with complexity. The Bible records a people under God, with a land as stage and covenant as script. The modern state records a nation under law, with a land as home and survival as mandate. When the two intersect, sparks fly. Some sparks ignite new light. Some sparks burn fingers. The drama continues precisely because the name still matters. It mattered to Jacob on a riverbank in the dark. It mattered to exiles who hung up their harps. It mattered to a doctor in Vienna in 1997 and a farmer in Rishon LeZion in 1982. It mattered to a poet who wrote Hatikvah in 1877 and to a paratrooper who touched a stone in 1967. It matters to a shopkeeper in Al-Fam and a rabbi in Beit El and a judge in Jerusalem. The word is a lifeline and a lightning rod. The truth of the link does not require denial of difference. The truth of the difference does not require denial of the link. The biblical echo resounds in modern Hebrew's speech, in the menorah etched on state seals, in the traffic that halts for Yom HaZikaron sirens, and in the pilgrim's sighs at a wall that once held up a temple platform. The modern echo resounds when an Independence Day flyover rumbles above Shavuot cheesecakes and psalms recited at dawn. The continuity holds because memory refuses to surrender, and because the people who carry this name decided to keep walking, writing, disputing, and rebuilding. Modern Israel versus biblical Israel reads like an argument. Modern Israel in biblical Israel reads like a biography. The landscape itself concludes the point without words. The Jezreel Valley rolls out like a tapestry that saw chariots and now holds tractors. The Jordan River still cuts its slow line north to south. The Galilee shimmers with fishing boats and kayaks. The Negev stretches in a hush that remembers patriarchs and Air Force drills. Cities hide palimpsests of script under asphalt. Names layered on names. The stones keep secrets that archaeologists coax and sometimes guess. The people keep arguments that prophets provoked and modern courts refine. The Old Covenant's voice continues to call out tenderness and justice, and the modern minister's voice continues to promise budgets and security. In that dissonance and in that harmony, the name Israel endures.